Welcome to Dark Horror Diaries, my friend. Before the show starts, do write below where are you from. Let's go. It had been a dream come true. Our first house, a place we could call our own. Daniel had always been the practical one, and I was the dreamer, forever searching for the perfect place to settle down. But when we found this house, tucked away on the outskirts of a quiet suburban neighborhood, it felt as though we had stepped into another world. The house had been custom built, and its design was a masterpiece of modern architecture. It was exactly what I had envisioned, spacious, elegant, and unique. But even as we signed the papers, something about it felt off. The first time we stepped inside, I was struck by the vastness of the space. High ceilings, polished hardwood floors, and windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. It was as if the house itself was breathing, alive with possibility. But the more I explored, the more I realized there were peculiarities. Hidden compartments and crawl spaces tucked away behind seemingly ordinary walls. I'd open a door, expecting a closet, only to find nothing but a narrow, empty corridor leading to a dead end. Another time, I found a small cabinet with a hidden latch that led to a compartment under the floorboards. It was almost as if the house was hiding something from us. Daniel didn't share my concerns. "It's just an old house with some quirks, Sophie. We knew what we were getting into," he said, brushing off my unease. But even as he spoke, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Something, or someone, was lurking just beyond my line of sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. I caught glimpses of shadowy figures out of the corner of my eye, but when I turned to look, the room was always empty. One afternoon, while Daniel was at work, I decided to explore the basement. The house had an old, unfinished basement, the kind that felt cold and damp, with low ceilings and narrow steps. It smelled of mildew and dust, and the walls were lined with shelves filled with old boxes and crates. I was looking for a place to store some of our things when I stumbled across a small stack of papers buried beneath a pile of old newspapers. At the top of the stack was a blueprint of the house, its detailed floor plan drawn in precise lines and angles. Curiosity piqued. I unrolled the blueprint on the floor, tracing the lines with my finger. That's when I saw it. A hidden room tucked behind a false wall in the master bedroom. I had walked past that wall a dozen times, but I never suspected there was anything behind it. The blueprint indicated a space that didn't appear on any of the other plans. An extra room, sealed off from the rest of the house. Why would the previous owners hide a room like that? I couldn't resist the temptation to investigate further. Later that evening, after Daniel had gone to bed, I grabbed a flashlight and set to work. The master bedroom was eerily quiet, as though even the walls were holding their breath. I gently pried at the edge of the false wall, and to my surprise, it gave way easily, revealing a small, hidden passage. I stepped inside, my heart racing with a mix of fear and excitement. The passage was narrow, so narrow that I had to hunch over to make my way through it. My flashlight flickered against the cold concrete walls, casting long, unsettling shadows. The air was thick with dust, and every step I took seemed to echo through the silence of the hidden space. The deeper I went, the more the oppressive feeling in the air seemed to weigh down on me. I could hear the creak of the house settling above, but here, beneath the floors, it was different. Dead quiet. It was as if the house had forgotten it even existed. At the end of the passage was a small door, inconspicuous, tucked away beneath the stairs leading up to the attic. I hesitated, my breath shallow as I reached for the handle. There was a strange, magnetic pull to the door, like something on the other side was waiting for me. I turned the knob slowly, and the door opened with a quiet groan. The room was tiny, almost claustrophobic. It smelled of stale air, the kind of dampness you'd expect to find in an abandoned house. The walls were lined with old wooden shelves, filled with objects that seemed out of place. Boxes of dusty old books, weathered furniture, and framed photographs cluttered the space. But it wasn't just the clutter that made me uneasy. It was the photographs. They were everywhere, scattered across the shelves and hanging crookedly on the walls. Black and white images of families, each one posed in the same living room that I had just come from. I stepped closer to one of the photos, my hands trembling as I picked it up. The image was of a smiling couple, young and carefree, their eyes fixed on the camera. But there was something wrong about their smiles. Something too wide, too forced. The room in the background was instantly recognizable. It was our living room. I looked closer, my breath catching in my throat. The couple in the photo weren't the current owners of the house. They weren't the previous owners either. They were strangers, people I had never seen before. I set the photo down and scanned the rest of the room. Every shelf, every corner, seemed to be filled with more pictures, each one capturing a different family, a different time, all within the same house. But none of the people in the photos looked happy. They were all staring at the camera with vacant eyes, as if they knew something we didn't. I felt a cold shiver crawl up my spine. Then I noticed something else. Something I hadn't seen at first. A small red light blinking in the corner of the room, near the ceiling. It was so faint, almost imperceptible, that I hadn't noticed it at first. My heart stopped. It was a camera. A hidden camera, watching me. Watching everything I did. I dropped the photo I was holding, my mind racing. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Whoever had lived here before us hadn't just left their memories behind. They had left something far more sinister. Someone had been watching us long before we ever moved in. And then, a cold voice in my mind whispered the question I had been trying to avoid. What happened to all the people in the photos? I could hardly breathe as I stood frozen in the small, suffocating room. The blinking red light of the camera was a constant reminder that I wasn't alone here, that somehow someone had been observing me from the shadows. My mind spun with 1,000 questions, but they all led to the same horrifying conclusion. We were being watched, and there was no way of knowing who was doing it or why. I backed away from the wall slowly, trying to steady my racing heart. The walls of the room seemed to close in on me as I made my way to the door, but just as I reached for the handle, I heard something behind me. A faint rustling sound like something moving in the shadows. I spun around, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the dark, but the room was empty. Just the photographs, the shelves, and the oppressive silence. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I turned quickly and bolted back through the hidden passage, back into the master bedroom. My legs felt weak and my head was spinning. I was gasping for air as I locked the door behind me, trying to gather my thoughts. I couldn't stay here, not knowing who, or what, was watching me, but I knew I had to tell Daniel. The next morning, I tried to explain everything to him. I showed him the blueprint, the photos, the camera. But his response was dismissive, as it always had been. "Sophie, you're overreacting. This house is old, and there are probably all sorts of old things hidden in it. People used to build weird stuff like that. Maybe it's just some kind of forgotten security system." But I wasn't convinced. "No, Daniel. This isn't just an old security system. This is something else. Someone is watching us. Someone has been here all along, and I think it's been happening for a long time." He sighed, rubbing his temples in frustration. "Look, I know you're scared, but we've been through a lot lately. Maybe your mind's playing tricks on you. You need to take a step back, Sophie." But I couldn't step back. I couldn't ignore what I had discovered. The photographs were proof. Evidence that something was terribly wrong with this house. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Later that day, I decided to search through the house's history. I pulled up records on the previous owners, hoping to find something, anything, that could explain the strange atmosphere in the house. What I found was even worse than I had imagined. The people who had lived here before us, they were gone, vanished. There was no record of their disappearance, just a brief mention of a family leaving the area in the middle of the night. There had been others too, families who had lived here for a short time, only to disappear without a trace. But there was one name that stood out among the others. The architect, Mr. Holloway. He had designed the house and overseen its construction, but after the house was finished, there was no record of him leaving. It was as if he had simply vanished. No one knew where he had gone, but his name appeared in the papers several times over the years, always in connection with bizarre, unexplainable events. And then, a cold shiver ran down my spine as I pieced it together. Mr. Holloway had never truly left. He was still here. The house seemed to press in on me from all sides, as if the walls themselves were closing in, suffocating me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn into something far darker than I could have ever imagined. Each time I thought I had a grasp on the truth, another layer of this nightmare peeled away, revealing something even more disturbing. Mr. Holloway, the architect, the man responsible for the creation of this home, was no longer a name on a piece of paper. He had become something more, a figure that lingered just outside the edges of my vision, waiting to step forward. I told Daniel what I had found, but this time there was a shift in his expression. His brow furrowed, and I saw the tiniest hint of concern in his eyes. "You think he's still here?" Daniel asked, his voice flat. "In the house?" "I don't know," I replied, my voice shaking. "But everything I found points to the fact that Mr. Holloway never really left. He designed this house. Designed it like a labyrinth, with hidden spaces, secret rooms. What if he's still living here, hiding in the walls, watching us? The blueprint, the photographs, they're proof that something's wrong." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. I could see him trying to rationalize it, to convince himself that there was a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew he understood the weight of what I was saying. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. There was something dark, something sinister, buried in the bones of this house. That night, as we lay in bed, I heard it again. A faint rustling sound coming from the walls. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, but the more I listened, the more it sounded like footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps, moving just beyond the walls. My heart pounded in my chest, and I glanced over at Daniel, who was fast asleep beside me. I wanted to shake him awake, to tell him to listen, but something in me held back. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever was in this house wasn't just a figment of my imagination. It was real. I got out of bed quietly, my bare feet padding softly across the floor as I grabbed my flashlight and moved to the master bedroom's hidden door. The passageway beckoned again, its dark mouth calling me. I hesitated for a moment, but the need to know the truth pushed me forward. I crept through the narrow passage, my mind racing, my breath quick and shallow. The camera was still blinking red in the corner of the room, but I couldn't take my eyes off the photographs. The faces of the people in the pictures seemed to be staring directly at me, their expressions frozen in time, as if they knew something I didn't. And then I noticed something new. A fresh photograph, one I hadn't seen before. It was taken just days ago. Daniel and I were in the picture, sitting on the couch in the living room, our backs turned, oblivious to the lens. My heart stopped. The camera hadn't just been watching me. It had been watching us both. A cold chill ran down my spine as I turned to leave the room, and that's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps, loud, distinct, and far too close. I whipped around just in time to see a figure emerging from the shadows, his face obscured by a hood. It was him, Mr. Holloway. My heart stopped in my chest. The figure standing before me, cloaked in shadow, took a step forward. His presence was suffocating, like the very air in the room thickened with his malevolent energy. His face was hidden beneath the hood, but I knew, deep down, who it was. Mr. Holloway, the architect, the man who had designed this house, and the one who had never left. I froze, my mind scrambling for a way to escape. But my legs felt like lead, rooted to the spot, as if the house itself were holding me captive. I could hear my breath, ragged and panicked, filling the silence between us. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching me with his dark, empty eyes. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, as if he were measuring me, sizing me up. And then, slowly, he reached up and pulled back his hood. His face was pale, almost ashen, with sharp, angular features. His eyes were cold and unblinking, two black pits that seemed to swallow all light. His lips curled into a thin, unsettling smile. There was something wrong about him, something not quite human. "I've been waiting," he said, his voice a low, rasping whisper that seemed to crawl inside my head. Waiting for someone to uncover the truth. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. The terror coursing through me paralyzed me where I stood. You've been watching us," I managed to choke out, my voice trembling. "All along. Why? What do you want?" He took a slow step toward me, his movements deliberate, almost fluid. I built this house, Sophie. I designed it to be more than just a structure. It's a place for watching, for waiting. The walls, they know things, they remember. Every family that has lived here has left their mark, their essence trapped inside these walls. And now, it's your turn. My stomach churned, the words sinking in like poison. The idea that this house had been built with such a twisted purpose, it was incomprehensible. But before I could react, Mr. Holloway reached into the folds of his coat, pulling out a small, gleaming scalpel. My blood ran cold as I saw the way his fingers caressed the handle, as if the blade was an extension of his own hand. You see, he continued, his smile widening. There's something special about you, Sophie. You've already uncovered so much, and now you'll help me finish my work. He raised the scalpel in the air, his eyes never leaving mine. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to escape before it was too late. But I couldn't move. I was trapped, cornered in this small, suffocating room. Just then, the sound of a door opening echoed through the passageway. I barely had time to register the noise before I heard Daniel's voice calling out to me, his footsteps rushing toward us. Sophie, what's going on? I could barely breathe, but I managed to whisper, get out of here now. But Mr. Holloway didn't seem concerned. Instead, he turned his attention toward the doorway, his smile never fading. Ah, Daniel, he said, his voice laced with amusement. I was wondering when you would show up, but it's too late for you now. Before I could say anything more, the door to the hidden room swung open, and Daniel appeared in the doorway. His eyes widened as he took in the scene. Me, backed into the corner, and the figure of Mr. Holloway standing between us, scalpel raised. Without thinking, Daniel lunged forward, knocking the scalpel from Holloway's hand. The two of them crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs, and for a brief moment, I thought we might escape. But Holloway was fast. He scrambled to his feet, his face twisted in fury. You think you can stop me, he hissed, his eyes filled with rage. Daniel and I exchanged a frantic glance. We had to get out of there. Together, we pushed Holloway back, forcing him toward the wall. The hidden room, his prison, was now our only chance. We slammed the door shut, trapping him inside. I was gasping for breath, my body shaking from the adrenaline. We need to barricade it, I said urgently, my voice hoarse. Daniel didn't hesitate. He pushed over an old bookcase, wedging it against the door. It wouldn't hold him forever, but it would buy us some time. We ran out of the room, up the stairs, and out of the house, barely able to breathe from the fear and panic that gripped us. When the police arrived, we led them to the house, but Holloway was nowhere to be found. The hidden room was sealed tight, the bookcase still blocking the door. But when the officers searched the house, they made a chilling discovery. The walls were lined with hidden compartments, each one containing the remains of past victims. Families who had vanished without a trace, their bodies preserved within the walls of this nightmare house. And as we left the house that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that, somewhere in the shadows, Holloway was still watching us, waiting for the next family to step inside. The police had found the bodies, but they hadn't found Holloway. Not a trace of him remained in the house. It was as if he had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind only the horrors he had carefully concealed within the walls. As the officers scoured every inch of the house, I couldn't shake the thought. He's still here. He's watching. The days after the incident passed in a blur. Daniel and I moved into a small apartment in the city, far from the house that had once been our dream home. But even as we tried to move on, the nightmare clung to us, lingering in the dark corners of our minds. I found myself looking over my shoulder at every turn, always expecting to see Holloway lurking in the shadows, his cold eyes watching me. We tried to forget about the house, but the truth was that the house would never let us forget. The nightmares began to haunt me again. I would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding as I heard the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving just beyond the walls. Sometimes I would wake up to see flashes of Mr. Holloway's face, his eyes staring at me, cold and unblinking. Daniel tried to reassure me, but even he couldn't deny the creeping sense of dread that had settled over us both. We weren't safe. Not really. The house had done something to us. changed us. It had marked us just like it had marked every other family that had lived there before. And no matter how far we ran, we couldn't escape the house's dark grip. Then, one night, after months of silence, we received an anonymous letter. The envelope was old, yellowed with age, and the handwriting was scrawled in a messy, hurried script. I tore it open, my hands shaking, and read the message inside. You think you're safe? You think you've escaped? You're wrong. I'm still watching. I'm always watching. The letter was signed with a single name, Holloway. I dropped the letter, my heart racing. The message was clear. Holloway hadn't gone anywhere. He was still out there, still watching us. And somehow I knew, deep in my gut, that he would never stop. I looked at Daniel, my hands trembling as I reached for him. We need to go back, I said, my voice barely a whisper. We need to end this. We have to stop him, once and for all. Daniel hesitated, his face pale. Sophie, we can't. What if he's still there? What if he's waiting for us? But I knew what had to be done. We had already been marked by that house. Holloway's obsession with us was far from over. The only way to end it, to finally be free, was to face him, to confront the evil that lingered within those walls. We returned to the house that night. It stood silent in the moonlight, its windows dark, its facade unchanged. The air was thick with an almost suffocating stillness. As we approached the front door, I felt it. An invisible pull like the house was drawing us in, urging us to enter. This time, we didn't hesitate. We walked through the door, each step heavy with the knowledge that this would be our final confrontation. The house seemed to welcome us, the air thick with the oppressive weight of its dark secrets. We moved through the rooms, our footsteps echoing in the silence, our breath shallow with fear. At the top of the stairs, I stopped. There, in the doorway of the hidden room, stood Mr. Holloway. His face was pale, his eyes hollow, but his smile, his cold, twisted smile, was as sharp and cruel as ever. You're too late, he said softly, his voice a whisper that sent a shiver down my spine. This house belongs to me now. And with that, he stepped forward, the door slamming shut behind him. The walls closed in, trapping us once more in the house that had become our prison. Holloway had won. But as I stood there, facing him in the darkened hallway, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let him win. I wasn't going to let him take me. I had survived everything this house had thrown at me, and I wasn't going to let it defeat me now. With every ounce of strength I had left, I lunged at Holloway, my hands grasping for the scalpel he held. We fought with everything we had. The walls trembled, and the house seemed to groan in protest as we struggled. But in the end, it was Holloway who faltered. As he fell, the house seemed to exhale, the oppressive weight lifting just slightly. The walls groaned one final time, and I heard a distant rumbling like something breaking apart. The camera, his eyes in the walls, blinked out. Holloway was gone, his twisted reign over the house finally ending. Daniel and I left the house that night, never looking back. The nightmare was over. I am in desperate need of advice. Call me Alice. My girlfriend, Lily, 24 female, and I, 23 female, moved into our first house 5 months ago. It's only 156 square feet and kinda shitty, but we love it. We call it our little cottage. We have 2 levels, a garage, a porch swing, a teeny front yard full of planter boxes, and plenty of space for me, Lily, and our cat Bugs. Pet tax. And it's practically brand new too. We're renting in I guess you'd call it a pocket neighborhood, because we only have 9 other neighbors, and the houses all face each other. It'd almost feel like a panopticon if the courtyard were a watchtower. Our neighbors are generally decent people from what we can tell, but they've been here longer than we have, so they're pretty close-knit, sort of insular. Not exactly the friendly type. To us, anyway. I only bring up the neighbors because I don't trust them. When we first moved in, our cottage was a dream. Just a total dream. Our landlord gives very few shits what we do, and our lease is a full 2 years, so we painted all the walls in pretty pastel shades of pink and orange as a nod to the lesbian flag. It felt like living in a sunset. Every weekend we'd go furniture hunting through thrift shops and yard sales and Craigslist ads. Neither I nor Lily is a hammer-wielding butch wonderkind, but we even built our own kitchen table, and it only wobbles a little. Like I said, a dream. The bullshit didn't start until August, 2 months after we'd moved in. It was nothing huge at first. Like the fall weather started early and Lily is always cold, so she started cranking up the heat, but one morning we woke up and found the thermostat set to 66 F. No idea why. She accused me of turning it down to pinch pennies. I'm kind of cheap, but I was like, I swear to God, I never touched the thing. The next morning it had dropped to 65 degrees Fahrenheit. For a week it kept dropping like that, 1 degree at a time, until the night it jumped from 60 degrees to 50 degrees. 50 fucking degrees. It was warmer than that outside. So of course we called the landlord, and of course he said he'd come in and fix it next week, which turned into next month, which turned into never, no matter how often we nagged him. The temp fluctuations grew more random. Sometimes the thermostat would stay at Lily's 78 degree F. Sometimes it'd only drop a few degrees. Sometimes it'd plunge down to 50-55 degree. Most of the time it'd stay around 65 degree. What's weird is that the temperature only changed at night. Or at least, we only ever noticed it after waking up in the morning. It got to be a ritual for us. We'd go downstairs, bleary-eyed and shivering, and while one of us started the coffee, the other would check the thermostat and yell, "God damn it," at a volume proportional to the number of degrees it had dropped. For the record, the temperature problem is only getting worse as the weather changes. We suspect the house was never properly sealed. The windows are drafty and go foggy in the mornings, and the front door whistles when it's windy. Plus, there's a doggy door downstairs, and we have no plastic panel to cover it because it's a really odd size. Like, bigger than any commercial doggy doors I've seen. I say commercial doggy doors because ours looks dead, so we figure the previous occupant had a fucking bodybuilder of a dog and had to make do. Anyway, the landlord won't take care of that either. We just wedged some cardboard in the exterior side of the doggy door. Welcome to my life. Since Lily ends up freezing most nights, I bought her a heated mattress pad. After one night on top of that thing, with all her blankets piled on top, I was like, I'm gonna die of heat stroke, so I'm currently sleeping on a cot in our bedroom. Yeah, that's right. A cot. With an old moving box as a nightstand. Not a great setup for an insomniac like me. I've started popping NyQuil caps or Benadryl tablets every night just to get to sleep. Not healthy, I know. Lily doesn't know about the NyQuil Benadryl thing, BTW. I mean, she uses Reddit, so she'll probably find out if this gains any traction. Hi, honey. But I haven't told her yet because I don't want her to think that I've gone loopy on OC meds. That I'm the one behind all this shit. See, it's not just the thermostat. We lost Lily's baby album. Her mom made it by hand. It has all of Lily's pictures from the first 2 years of her life. We keep it in our bookcase, right on the left end of the top shelf. It's a big white book frilled with pink lace. You can't miss it. One night, around mid-late September, Lily went to grab a cookbook while we were making dinner, and she froze. Just stopped in her tracks, completely stone still. She asked what had happened to her baby album. She asked if maybe I'd moved it somewhere and had forgotten where I put it. I said that I had no idea what happened to it, and I didn't. I don't. But I keep finding those baby pictures. It's really weird. Lily doesn't find them. Only I do. They turn up in strange places. Behind bugs, cat food, between the pages of other books, under the coffee maker, inside the toes of my shoes. And always, the photos are headless. It's never done with scissors, though. Lily's head is always ripped off. The tears are violent white slashes, jagged and uneven like they were done in a hurry. Like whoever did it cared about nothing so much as beheading Lily as fast as they could. Last week, when I was walking into work, I put my hands in my pockets and felt a crumpled wad of something glossy. When I smoothed it out, I recognized it as a photo I'd seen before. Little Lily sat in front of her second birthday cake, her lips pursed to blow out the candles. But it had been torn so violently, half her body was just missing. There was nothing left but a chubby toddler hand, a fragment of dark hair, a snatch of pink fabric that had been a t-shirt. The shirt, I remembered, had said, "Doggone cute." in a speech bubble floating over a cartoon poodle. Now it just said, gone. Lily, if you read this, I'm sorry I haven't told you. And I'm even more sorry that I've been throwing away your baby pictures. But they're ruined anyway. Maybe if it were just the thermostat, or just the baby pictures. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't be so worried. Maybe if I weren't the only one who kept stumbling across my decapitated partner, if Lily also, well, whatever. The thing is, Reddit, the baby pictures aren't even the worst part. On Halloween, Lily and I went to a spooky cocktail night at the neighborhood center. No one invited us, but I saw it mentioned on Nextdoor. We were just trying to get to know some people, maybe make some friends, you know. The neighbors were polite, I guess, but we couldn't get much more than a civil smile out of anyone. And then I got horrible food poisoning, so we walked home pretty early. Maybe 7-ish. As soon as we got home, we collapsed in Lily's bed and conked out, like, instantaneously. Even me. I usually sleep like shit when I'm drunk, but I'd been pretty woozy and out of it at the party. I slept like a rock all night, then spent the next day puking. Whenever we drink, Lily will take a single taste of my drink and be content with her imminent hangoverlessness, so she felt fine. We called in sick to work, and she took care of me all day. That night, after I started feeling better, she asked me out of the blue, "Alice, how drunk were you last night?" I was like, "WTF are you talking about? I only had a few drinks. I probably got food poisoning from the tuna sandwich I brought to work." That's when she showed me the picture. It was in her camera roll, right beside all her pics from the party, but this was something different. The photo was so dark, I could hardly make out the details. Then I realized it was Lily. Lily lying in bed on her stomach like she always does. Lily all by herself. I'd slept beside her all night. But in the picture, it was just Lily, alone. I kept checking the time stamp over and over. November 1st, 2022, 2:33 am. Halloween night. The night I slept so deeply, I woke up sore all over from keeping the same position for 12 hours straight. But Lily insisted I had to have taken it. I mean, it had to have been me, right? Right. That's what I told her anyway. Sure, it was me. Of course it was me. I must have been drunker than I realized. I know it wasn't me though. And in your heart, Lily, you know that too. Before you deleted the photo, I kept catching you staring at it. You must have spent hours poring over it. Lily, there is no conceivable way you missed that it had been taken from ceiling height, directly over your body. A bird's eye view of your naked, sleeping figure. I'm 5'2". Even if I'd stood on the bed with my legs straddling your torso, I couldn't have taken that picture. Not from that height. Not from that angle. And sweetheart, that's not all. If you're reading this, you know I've been taking NyQuil and Benadryl to sleep. My medicine keeps going missing, Lily. I keep it in that one box we never finished unpacking, the one full of old cables and electronics. If you haul that box out of the broom closet, inside you'll find a half-full bottle of Benadryl and an empty 48-count box of NyQuil caps. But I only bought them 6 weeks ago, baby. I can't have gone through them that fast. My medicine is disappearing, and it's no mystery where. I know how food-aggressive Bugs gets, and I know you think it's sweet that I wanted to commandeer food duty after he bit you. But that's not why I want to be the one who feeds him. I've started finding pills in his dry food. Hot pink Benadryl tabs. Little teal gel caps full of NyQuil. No matter how many times I swap his food bags for new ones behind your back, those pink and green pills keep appearing in his bowl. I have to lock him in the bathroom so he doesn't scarf them down before I can pick them out. Once I combed through an entire bag of cat kibble piece by piece. I felt insane, Lily. But even though I was positive, I was certain there were no pills in there. Somehow, the next morning, there it was. That Technicolor confetti dotting his food. I'm not poisoning our cat, or fucking with the thermostat, or tearing up your baby pictures, or photographing you naked in the dead of night. But someone is. Someone is. And I can feel the concern bleeding off of you like tides of radiation. But I am not crazy. You pull me away from the window when I stare out of it. You don't understand that I'm only staring because they stare first. The neighbors. Didn't you think it was weird how, after we moved in, not a single one of them stopped by to introduce themselves or give us a housewarming gift? Why didn't they talk to us at the cocktail party, Lily? Why don't we know any of their names? They peer in our windows. I can see them. Hell, for all I know, one of them is reading this even as I write it. I don't know how, but they could. They'd figure out a way. Look what I found under our doormat, my love. A Bible page, torn as violently as all your baby pictures. They've highlighted Proverbs 16:18, pride goeth before destruction, and an haughty spirit before a fall, and written December 1st at the top of the page. Pride, like gay pride, and you know December 1st is World AIDS Day. So maybe they're homophobic. Or maybe they want us to think that they are so they can hide their true motive. Does it even matter anymore? They're tormenting us. It started with the thermostat, and it's only getting worse from there. Maybe they want us dead, Lily. I know you don't like how much work I've been missing lately, but I have to stay home and keep bugs safe. Don't you get it? We're not safe here. So stop telling me to see a doctor, and stop giving me those looks like I'm a grenade, fragile and dangerous at once. I'm sick of not sleeping in a cot across the room, sick of the cold, sick of you, and everything you've blamed me for. You saw that fucking photograph. You know what's happening to us. But you still think I'm crazy. She thinks I'm crazy, Reddit. What am I going to do? What's going to happen on December 1st? I am not crazy. I'm not. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy. I am not crazy. Part 2. It's Alice again. 4 things first. 1. We have a working carbon monoxide detector, so I know I don't have carbon monoxide poisoning. I forgot to mention that in my first post. 2. As far as I know, Lily hasn't seen my post. She mostly looks at beauty and fashion subs, so I guess I'm not terribly surprised. Please don't try to find her or show her my posts. I'm half relieved and half disappointed. I think in a way, by posting on Reddit, I was preparing myself to talk to her about everything that's been going on. But she didn't see it, and I'm too cowardly to bring any of this up myself. Part of me is sure she won't believe me. She'll just be further convinced that the problem is me losing my sanity. 3. We're not leaving. On Wednesday, I brought up the prospect of staying in a hotel room for a few days, but Lily laughed it off immediately like, in what universe can we afford a pet sitter for bugs and a hotel room just because the thermostat's fucky? She doesn't know what I know, and I will not leave without her. I'm scared, of course I'm scared, but maybe staying is the right choice anyway, because what would we do? Where would we go? We're not even a quarter of the way through our lease, and both my parents and Lily's live hours away from Lily's workplace. I doubt we could afford a hotel or motel for long. And what if, God, I hate even typing this, but what if we do leave, and the creep follows us anyway? What the hell do we do then? 4. I quit my job, largely because of everything. I know that might seem drastic, but it isn't really. I've been working the front desk at a dental office for a couple years, and I've built up some okay benefits pay, but I don't even need my degree for that job, so it was never my long-term plan. Lily's had to be the main breadwinner. The less than ideal part is that I didn't give 2 weeks' notice. On Wednesday, I handed my office manager a letter explaining that I'm having a personal crisis and need to be at home, so I wouldn't be showing up on Thursday, or ever. Probably not great in terms of references for future jobs. I don't think I had any choice but to quit though. I'm just so afraid for Bug's pet Tax. He's our little baby. I've refused to let him out of my sight for the past few days, which he's not super thrilled about because he's cuddly, but not that cuddly. Thanks to all the pills I was finding in his dry food, I've started buying him canned food. Lily got kind of annoyed and said, "You're the one who said wet food was too expensive in the first place." So I had to make up some BS about why wet food is so much better for food-aggressive cats. Lily would be even more upset with me if she knew I quit my job. But it's okay. Bug's new food has been safe so far. That's all that matters to me, keeping my family safe. After my first post, a lot of people warned me about our weirdly sized DIY doggy door. That, well, let's be real, it scared the hell out of me. But I took out the cardboard and tried to crawl through the door myself, and I just couldn't force my hips through. To be fair, my hips don't lie, and I never lost my COVID-15. Okay, COVID-20. Still, I'm pretty small, so I don't think that whoever's doing all this is getting in through the doggy door. Which is even more worrying in a way, because if not the doggy door, how? We lock all our windows and doors at night. I triple check after Lily goes to bed. Just to be safe, I moved our mini fridge with all our drinks in front of the doggy door. But I don't think that's the answer. I think they found another way in. Some way I don't even know about. I did get some cameras to hide around the house. Thank you, same-day delivery. One of the cameras looks like a charger, which I plugged into the outlet beside the bookcase for a view of the living room and front door. Another is disguised as an alarm clock, so I put it on top of my cardboard box nightstand in the bedroom with my cot, the cat bed, and Lily's bed. The third camera is inside a clock, because we've been wanting a clock for the kitchen anyway. That one should catch anyone who tampers with Bugs' food or food bowls. As for outdoors, I wish I had cameras there too, but proper security cameras are expensive, and there's only so much I can afford. I figured the inside of the house was more pressing, since that's where everything's been happening. And the kind of cameras you use outside would be hard to hide from Lily. No, I didn't tell her about the cameras either. I know it sounds like I'm all but leading a double life now, and I guess I kind of am. But if she asked me about any of this, I would tell her. I made a post on Nextdoor asking for security camera recommendations. Just trying to scare off the creep, you know. Let them know that I'm watching them back. Nobody replied, BTW. Lily doesn't use Nextdoor, but if she did, if she saw my post, I'd tell her about the cameras. I'd tell her anything she wanted to know. It's just a lot to spring on her at once. Quitting my job, and the cameras, and the OC meds I've been taking. I don't want her to think I'm losing it any more than she already thinks I am. I am not losing it. I'm not crazy. And I know I'm not crazy because it's been working. Thursday was the day I made that Nextdoor post and put up the cameras. Ever since Thursday, it's been quiet. No thermostat changes. No pills missing from my recently replenished stash. No torn up baby pictures. Except, I have been losing time a little. I don't remember when it started. A week ago, maybe, but I just thought I was coming down with something. There's that flu going around. I even briefly forgot the myriad benefits of lesbian sex and thought I'd gotten pregnant, It's just that sometimes, in the mornings when I'm feeding Bugs or checking the cameras or tearing out strands of my hair, sometimes I get sick. If you've ever gone too long without eating and ended up shaky and nauseous, it's kind of like that. I feel this static hush of exhaustion like a sandbag weighing down my body and my head, making it impossible to climb the stairs or stand or even sit up. My stomach pulls into a sick knot. I get dizzy, almost drunk, and my hands tremble and my lungs clamp shut and black spots drift through my vision, and I feel so tired. I feel so tired. So clammy and breathless and so tired. I know that sounds bad. I guess maybe it is. But I've had low blood pressure all my life. When I was younger, I even used to faint on rare occasions from standing up too fast. My pediatrician was convinced I had POTS until he did a tilt table test and I fared okay. He told me to drink more water, take a multivitamin, and eat more salt, and I've been doing all right since. Sometimes I wear compression stockings. But this is new. When I'm lying on the kitchen floor, staring blurry-eyed at the ceiling, fighting to catch my breath, sweating even as I'm racked with chills. That's not normal, is it? When my vision goes black and I have to lie down and I wake up in a whole new room of the house. That can't be right. That's never happened before. Yesterday I was alone in the house except for Bugs. Lily was at work. I was having cold cereal for lunch because I hadn't felt right all day. And it happened again. I got sick. I put my head on the kitchen table and closed my eyes just for a second. I swear it was only a second. This isn't like when you tell yourself you're just gonna rest your eyes and end up conking out. It was like anesthesia. I blinked, and when I woke up, I was in the bathtub. Reddit, the faucet was running. It was running so hot it had scalded my skin pink and raw, and there was water streaming down the side of the tub. An inch of standing water on the floor. I grabbed the faucet handle and turned off the water and threw myself out of the tub. But I slipped on the wet floor, and I hit my head on the wall and sort of really hurt myself. Even now, I can feel the bump on my head throbbing. And when I opened the bathroom door, the hallway carpet had kind of been stopping up the crack under it. So a tide of water started bleeding into the carpet, and I just stared at it and cried. And I have no idea what happened. I checked the footage from my little clock camera, but all I saw was me sitting with my head on the table for 30 or 40 seconds before I stood slowly and stumbled out of the kitchen. Like a drunk person, but I wasn't drunk. A sleepwalker, but I don't sleepwalk. No other cameras caught me on my way to the bathroom. I don't know if I was unconscious in the tub or just, I don't know. I don't know how long I was in there. I don't know why I ran a bath. I don't even like baths. I don't like to leave the house anymore either. What if I blacked out while driving? Or worse, what if whoever's been fucking with us wants revenge on me for getting cameras? What if I passed out and woke up in their basement or something? What if they hurt me? What if they kill me? What if I never get to tell Lily how sorry I am that I didn't protect her better? I've been trying Reddit. I've been making her share her location with me. We've never been the type of couple who always has to know where the other one is, but I told her to turn on her location and never turn it off again. For my sake. And she did, because somehow, Reddit, she loves me even now. I make her send me a selfie every time she gets to work, text me at the start of every lunch break, let me know she's coming home the moment she gets off. If it were up to me, she'd text me at all her red lights too. Nothing much, just, I'm safe, I'm coming home. But I can't ask her to do that. We don't own guns. Neither of us likes guns. But I'm thinking about getting a concealed weapon permit. I've already bought us both pepper spray. She wants to know why I'm so paranoid. She wants me to go to therapy, get anxiety meds, see a support group. Something. Lily, I am doing something. Don't you realize that I'm doing all I can? I'd ride to work with you if I didn't have to stay home and watch bugs. I never want to leave you alone. If I could open my chest and carry you around inside my ribcage, I would. I would let you curl up safe inside my heart and feed off my blood, if you'd only let me. So don't worry, honey. There's no more poisoned food or missing pills or headless babies in our house. The only person watching you through a camera lens is me. For you, I made all of it go away. At least for now. And I'm starting reconnaissance on our neighbors. They watch us, Lily, I swear. But I'm watching them back. Sometimes I crack open our front window and close the pale pink curtains and lie on the couch listening to them talk in the courtyard. I'm going to figure out which of them is trying to kill us. Maybe it's only one person. Maybe it's all of them. I don't care. They're trying to drive us out of our skulls, baby. Late on Wednesday night, when I got too scared to sleep, I went downstairs to check the doggy door and relock the windows and count all the pills in my bottle of Benadryl. There on the kitchen floor, I saw a single drop of blood. Just a little pinhead globe of red, still wet, pristine and perfect, and nearly black in the moonlight. Whose blood was that, Lily? Who the hell was in our kitchen? I'll figure it out before December 1st, my love. And when I do, I'm going Goodstletch. JGHHHHHHHHHHNNNN. I'll figure it out before December 1st, my love. And when I do, I'm going to make sure that no one ever mess with our family again. The old Victorian house on Maple Lane was exactly what I needed. Remote, quiet, and far enough from the city to give me the space I'd been craving after the divorce. I'd left everything behind, the cluttered apartment, the constant reminders of past failures, and the people who only saw me as the guy whose marriage ended. In the solitude of this weathered house, I could breathe again. My name's James, and at 33, I felt like I was starting over from scratch. I found a job working remotely as a graphic designer. The work was easy enough, though it didn't come with the excitement I'd once gotten from my fast-paced city job. But what did I expect? Everything felt slower here, more deliberate. The town was small, nestled between hills, and the house itself was a masterpiece of decay. The wallpaper in the living room had faded into a pattern of dull ghosts. The floorboards creaked like a funeral march beneath my feet. The windows were framed with grime, but it was all part of its charm. It had a history, a presence. A former owner, a reclusive woman, had lived here for years. She'd disappeared about a decade ago, and the rumors about her were still circulating among the locals. I didn't mind the whispers, or the fact that the neighbors seemed to avoid me. I didn't need anyone in my life, not after everything that had happened. The house was mine now, and it was where I would rebuild alone as it should be. But as the days wore on, there was something off. I chalked it up to the isolation, the eerie quiet that settled in when the sun dipped below the trees. That's when the noises started. It was faint at first, just a soft, rhythmic knocking that seemed to come from above. I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe the wind making the old pipes rattle. But the knocking grew louder, more insistent, as if someone was trying to get my attention from the attic. I had avoided the attic so far, not out of fear, but because it seemed unnecessary. There was nothing up there, just dust and old junk left behind by the woman who had lived here. I didn't even want to know what kind of life she had led, much less explore the remnants of it. But the knocking persisted, and then came the breathing. Muffled, faint, almost like a whisper in the walls, followed by a soft sigh. It wasn't just the house. Someone, or something, was up there. I stood in the hallway, listening to it, feeling the air around me grow heavier, colder. That's when I made up my mind. I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. I wasn't going to let it haunt me like I'd let everything else in my life. The attic door was locked. It had a rusty padlock, and I had no key. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I fetched a crowbar from the basement and began working on the door. The wood groaned in protest as I pried it open, the metal lock snapping apart with an agonizing screech. The air that poured out was musty, filled with dust and years of abandonment. It smelled like old paper and rot. Inside, I found a space that didn't match the rest of the house. It was lived in. Not just a storage space, but a makeshift home. A mattress lay in the corner, blankets strewn across it. A dresser filled with women's clothing. Blouses, skirts, dresses, all neatly folded but worn with age. I noticed something strange. Photographs pinned to the wall, dozens of them. Each one seemed to capture moments from inside my house. Shots taken through the very windows I had stared out of, sometimes while I was sitting at my desk, others from the porch. Whoever had taken these photos had been watching me, and they had been watching for a lot longer than I had realized. I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. The photos, they were of me, but they weren't taken by any friendly neighbor or lost soul. They were taken by someone who had been inside my home, someone who knew my every move. I felt a chill run down my spine, and for the first time since I'd moved in, I was genuinely afraid. The room felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing in as the soft knocking from above resumed, more urgent now, more insistent. It wasn't just the house anymore. It was as if the house itself was trying to tell me something I was too terrified to understand. I pulled away from the photographs, my breath shallow as I scanned the attic, desperate to find any clues that might explain what was going on. But there was nothing else, nothing except for a locked trunk tucked against the far wall. The same trunk I had missed in my initial sweep of the room. My mind raced. Was this where it all began? Was this where the woman had disappeared? I didn't want to open it, didn't want to face whatever dark secrets it might hold, but I couldn't just leave it. Something was pushing me toward it, and I felt like I had no choice but to open it. The trunk was old, the wood warped from years of neglect, but the lock was surprisingly intact. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should just leave the attic and never return. But the knocking, the whispering, it all felt too personal, too deliberate to ignore. I found a small key hidden beneath a loose floorboard and worked it into the lock, feeling the satisfying click as it gave way. The lid creaked open, revealing what I had hoped I wouldn't find. Inside, there were more photographs, more of me. But these weren't just of me. They were pictures of women, old photographs, each one marked with the same unsettling detail. They had all lived in this house at one point or another. Some looked familiar, some unfamiliar, but all had one thing in common. They were all gone. There was no sign of them, no trace. And as I sifted through the photos, I found something more disturbing. A collection of jewelry. Necklaces, rings, bracelets. All neatly arranged, like trophies from someone who had been collecting pieces of their victims. The realization hit me like a slap to the face. Whoever had been living here before me hadn't just been watching. They had been hunting. I shut the trunk with a loud thud, panic rising in my chest. I backed away, tripping over the mattress in my haste to get out. My mind was spinning. I couldn't make sense of it. How had I missed all of this? How had I not seen the signs? But the deeper I thought about it, the more the pieces started to fall into place. The noises, the breathing, the feeling that I wasn't alone in this house. There was something, or someone, hidden in the shadows, lurking just out of sight. I had to find out who it was. But as I stood there in the dim attic, the floorboards creaked behind me, and I froze. The knock from above grew louder, echoing down the stairs. It wasn't coming from the attic. It was coming from beneath me. I should have left. I should have packed my bags and fled the house right then and there. But curiosity, that dangerous impulse, kept me rooted to the spot. The knocking came again, louder this time, as if trying to break through the floor. It was coming from under the house. The thought of what might be down there, hidden beneath the creaky floorboards, twisted my stomach into knots. But I had to know. I couldn't let this madness consume me. I needed to uncover the truth. I made my way downstairs, my footsteps tentative and heavy. The house groaned under the weight of my every movement, its ancient structure trembling like it was alive. The air was thick with dust and the musty scent of neglect. But there was something else now, something that made my skin crawl. An oppressive presence. It was as if the house itself was watching me, its every creak and groan a reminder that I was not alone. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the flickering bulbs overhead. I hesitated at the foot of the stairs, listening. The knocking was coming from beneath the floorboards in the room at the end of the hall. The one I'd never ventured into. I had always avoided it, too afraid to disturb whatever it was that lurked behind the locked door. But tonight I had no choice. I had to face it. I pulled open the door with a groan, and my eyes fell on the narrow crawl space beneath the house. It was covered by a trapdoor, half hidden under the worn carpet. The edges were worn, as if it had been used frequently. I kneeled down, my hands trembling, and pried the trapdoor open. A wave of cold air rushed up from below, making me shiver. The darkness in the crawl space seemed to swallow the light from my flashlight as I peered down, but I could just make out the outline of something. A figure barely visible in the shadows. I hesitated, the fear settling deep in my chest like a stone. I was standing on the precipice of something far worse than I had ever imagined. But then I heard it. The sound of breathing. Soft, ragged, and close. Too close. My heart slammed against my ribs as I dropped my flashlight, sending it tumbling down into the crawl space. I could hear the faint clatter as it hit the ground, and then, nothing. Silence. I stood frozen, too terrified to move, too scared to even breathe. The quiet stretched on, and for a moment, I almost convinced myself that I was imagining things. That there was nothing down there but shadows and dust. But then, from the darkness, a figure emerged. It was a man. Pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that glinted in the dim light. His skin was stretched tight over his bones, his body emaciated, as if he hadn't eaten in weeks. He was wearing a faded uniform, a handyman's shirt, tattered and torn. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes said everything. I stumbled back, nearly falling as I tried to get away. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my mind raced to comprehend what was happening. This man, this figure, he had been here the whole time. He had been living in my house, hidden away in the crawl space, watching me. Watching me for how long? How many other women had come and gone before me? And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he lunged toward me. I didn't know how I managed to break free. My legs moved before I could think, my body reacting to the terror flooding through me. The man's outstretched hand brushed against my ankle, sending a jolt of panic through my veins. My heart was a drumbeat in my ears as I scrambled back, pushing myself to my feet. I had no time to think, no time to plan. My only thought was escape. I bolted for the stairs, my feet pounding against the creaking floorboards, desperate to get away from whatever this thing was that had been hiding beneath my house. I heard the scrape of his bare feet against the wood behind me, the wet sound of his labored breathing growing louder. I reached the top of the stairs and spun around, slamming the door shut behind me with a force that rattled the old wood. But the door didn't lock. The old hinges groaned in protest, and I could hear the man's labored steps getting closer. I had seconds, maybe less. I glanced around the hallway, my eyes wild, looking for any escape, any way out. That's when I saw it. The trapdoor beneath my bed. I hadn't noticed it before, but it was there, right under my nose. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was something. Something that might offer me a way out of this nightmare. I didn't stop to think. I dropped to my knees and pried the trapdoor open with shaking hands. The smell that hit me was worse than I expected. Damp, stale air that made my stomach turn. But I didn't have the luxury of hesitation. I squeezed through the opening and into the narrow crawl space beneath my bed. It was dark, suffocating, but at least it offered me the cover I needed. The floor was cold beneath my hands, and I could hear the man's footsteps echoing through the house. I dared not make a sound. I held my breath, my heart racing, my entire body tense with fear. I could hear him moving through the room above me, calling out my name in a low whisper. My name. He knew who I was. He'd been watching me. I couldn't stay in the crawl space forever. I knew that. But there was no other choice. I had to wait for him to leave. I had to think of something, anything that could get me out of this house alive. Then I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible creak from the floor above me. A sound I'd come to dread. The trapdoor under my bed had opened again. I wasn't alone anymore. I pulled myself further into the shadows, praying he couldn't hear me. But there was no escaping the man's presence. I could feel him closing in, his breath growing louder as he reached the opening of the crawl space. And then, as I braced myself for whatever would come next, I felt something cold and sharp graze my ankle. His hand. I froze. The man's fingers were like ice as they tightened around my ankle. My breath caught in my throat as I fought the urge to scream, my mind racing. The trapdoor above me creaked again, but this time it was not just the man. I could hear something else. A soft scraping sound, almost rhythmic, as if something was being dragged across the floor above. The atmosphere in the crawl space grew suffocating, heavy with the smell of mildew and decay. It felt as though the very walls were closing in on me, trapping me in a nightmare I couldn't escape. His grip tightened, sending a jolt of pain up my leg. The terror I had been feeling before intensified into something primal. I kicked out, thrashing against him, but it only made his hold stronger, more determined. The darkness around us felt alive, pulsing with every beat of my heart. And then I heard him speak. His voice low and rasping, barely above a whisper. "You're just like the others, just another one to take." His words cut through the air like a knife, sending a wave of nausea over me. The others. I didn't want to know who he was talking about. I didn't want to hear it. But the image of the women's clothing and jewelry flashed in my mind. They were gone. And now I knew why. I had become his next victim. Panic surged through me as I kicked harder, desperate to break free. My foot found purchase against the floor, and with all the strength I could muster, I slammed my heel into his wrist. He hissed, the grip loosening, and I wrenched my ankle from his grasp. I didn't wait to see what he would do next. I scrambled to my feet and dashed through the narrow crawl space, my body screaming in protest as I pushed forward. The tight space made it difficult to move quickly, but I didn't care. I needed to get out. I needed to escape. The house groaned under my movements, the floorboards above me creaking as if the man was following. The air felt thicker now, heavier with the suffocating pressure that pressed against my chest. But the trapdoor behind me was close. Just a few more feet, and I could make it. I reached for the edge of the opening, my fingers trembling as I pulled myself up and out of the crawl space. My legs wobbled beneath me as I stumbled into the room, gasping for air. I spun around, glancing over my shoulder, but the man hadn't followed. At least, not yet. My mind raced as I scrambled for the nearest weapon. Anything to defend myself. I grabbed a rusty old pipe that lay forgotten by the wall and held it tightly in my hands, my knuckles white with fear. The silence in the room was deafening, but the knocking, it was back. Louder now, like a pounding drum that reverberated through the walls. And then I saw it. The trapdoor in the corner of the room was open. The same trapdoor I had been avoiding for days. I had made it out, but the man was still here. He had never left. Suddenly, the door behind me slammed shut with a deafening bang, and I whirled around, heart racing. My breath caught in my throat. Standing in the doorway was the man, his face twisted into a sickening grin, bloodshot eyes gleaming with a madness I couldn't begin to comprehend. He took a slow step forward, and I raised the pipe instinctively. But just before I could strike, I heard a loud crash from the front door. Someone was outside. The sound of the crash at the front door sent a wave of relief rushing through me. I didn't know who it was, but it didn't matter. Help was here. But the man standing before me, his grin only widened as if he already knew what was coming, as if he had expected someone to show up. His cold eyes never left mine, his posture casual despite the fact that I was holding a pipe ready to swing. I didn't move. I couldn't. Every muscle in my body was frozen in place, paralyzed by the fear that had overtaken me. The front door crashed again, louder this time, followed by the unmistakable sound of shuffling footsteps. It wasn't the man who was making the noise. It was someone else. Someone who was finally here to help me. "James!" a voice called out from the hallway. Loud, urgent. It was the police. I couldn't believe it. They had come. The man in front of me snarled, his eyes narrowing as he turned his head toward the hallway. His hand twitched, as if considering whether to retreat into the shadows or face the incoming threat. But before he could decide, I took a step forward, raising the pipe in my hands. My body was still shaking, but I had a surge of adrenaline. I wouldn't let this man take control anymore. "Stay back," I shouted, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "Stay away from me." The man didn't flinch. Instead, he let out a low laugh, one that sent shivers down my spine. His fingers twitched, and I saw the flash of something metallic in his hand. Something I hadn't noticed before. A knife. He was preparing to strike. The door burst open, and 2 officers stormed into the room, their guns raised. "Police, freeze." The man took one last look at me, his grin widening before he raised the knife. But it was too late. The officers opened fire, 2 shots ringing out in quick succession. The man collapsed to the floor with a sickening thud, the knife slipping from his hand as he hit the ground. I stood there frozen as the officers quickly secured the area. One of them approached me, his expression softening when he saw the state I was in. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. I nodded, too stunned to speak. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving me exhausted and numb. Another officer stepped forward, crouching beside the man's body. "We'll need to get him identified, but you're safe now. He won't hurt anyone else." The realization hit me then. The nightmare was over. The man who had been hiding in my house, watching me, stalking me, hunting me, was finally gone. His reign of terror had ended, but the scars, both physical and emotional, would linger for a long time. One of the officers helped me to a chair, and I sat there, staring at the trapdoor under my bed, still open, still waiting. It was all too much. Too many unanswered questions, too many things I didn't want to know. But one thing was certain. The house, that old Victorian house, would never be the same for me again. As the police took the body away, I couldn't help but feel the weight of everything that had happened. I had come here to rebuild my life, to start fresh after my divorce. But what I found in that house, what I had lived through, was something I would never be able to forget. As the officers filed out, one of them turned to me. "We'll need to take your statement, but for now, you're free to go. You're not in any danger anymore." Our neighborhood has always been typical, white picket fence, suburbia on the outside. Every generation, new young couples move in to replace the older people who have finally left after a lifetime of the same lawns, the same friendly faces. It's always been an idyllic setting in which to raise a family and turn old and gray. Everyone here knows each other. Most have since they were kids, moving into their parents' home once their parents decided it was time to finish out their years somewhere else. I'm an oddball because I'm a transplant. None of my family have ever been able to afford the houses in this area. I'd always driven by with my mom in her beaten-up station wagon, ogling the beautiful homes, meticulously landscaped lawns and lush green trees. I grew up and was the first in my family to go to college. I didn't waste the opportunity afforded to me and got a nice cushy job, a kind and caring wife, and a couple of rambunctious kids. The little American dream that was my life was finally wrapped up in a tight little bow, when, at the closing, I was handed the keys to my own slice of paradise. We'd only been here for a week when I realized just how odd my neighbors were. At first I just thought it was because I was a stranger, infiltrating their bubble, but the bubble itself seems to have burst altogether. I began to notice that when the neighbors waved to each other while doing their respective yard work, it was a little too forceful, an accompanying grimace painted across their faces that they tried to sell as a smile. The knocking at our door was just slightly too insistent, and the handshakes they gave to welcome us to the neighborhood were just a bit too firm. Their hair was just a tad too perfect. Their eyes were perpetually blank. I began to catch them unashamedly staring at my family, and whenever we ventured out the front door, their neighborly facades seemingly beginning to crack. They were just staring with the same dead eyes I've begun to grow accustomed to, and each time I returned their gaze, I felt my muscles tense and had an overwhelming urge to put as much distance between them and myself as possible. That's when I began to hear things in the dead of night. There was a strange scratching from along our siding, a gentle scraping of something sharp caressing the exterior of our home. It didn't last for long, just a few minutes at most. I peered out the window to see if I could spot the source of the noise, seeing instead a neighbor leering at me through their living room window, their whole house illuminated against the oppressive blackness of the night. In the morning, I inspected the perimeter of my home and found nothing out of place. There were no footprints in the mulch, no marks on the siding. There were no trees with branches close enough to the house to make that noise. I shrugged it off as best I could, but all through work that day, the mystery lingered in the back of my mind. The next night, the scratching returned. I peeked again and found no culprit, but did find 3 lit-up houses and 3 neighbors, the original and 2 more, staring in the direction of my home. The next day I called out of work. When the first neighbor emerged to do his daily weeding, I made my way over to him, knowing I needed to see if he'd let me in on what's going on. As I approached, he affixed his unnerving smile and shouted, "Howdy, neighbor." "Hi, Steve," I replied, attempting to return his smile. "How you doing?" he asked me as I noticed that he'd gone an unnaturally long time without blinking. "I'm okay, thanks. I wanted to ask if you'd seen anything in my yard the past couple nights." For the first time since moving here, I saw a flicker of something in one of these robopopple's eyes, and that something was clearly fear. Steve paused a moment before saying, "He's been outside your house. We've been keeping an eye out for you, though. He doesn't like the light." "Who is he, and what have you been watching for?" Steve's eyes glazed over again before he said, "I think I hear Marcia calling me. Good to see you, Cal." And he did a 180 turn before marching away. That night there was no scratching. I looked out the window, and Steve's windows were as dark as the night was black. 5 other houses on the street stood illuminated with their occupants gazing directly at his house. I returned to bed and drifted into an uneasy sleep. I awoke to screaming, loud and shrill, coming from the direction of Steve's. I hurried to the window and saw Marcia out in the yard, sprinting and shrieking, bathrobe whipping in the wind. I felt the sweat begin to erupt through my palms and heard my wife stir behind me. "What's going on?" she asked, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. I ignored her. I stood, rooted to the spot, watching Marcia as she continued to run down the street, before a hulking figure that had been lurking in the shadows rushed her. She was caught and hurtled into the air, her cries ceasing immediately as she was dropped to the pavement where she laid, unmoving. The figure turned to me before slinking back into the darkness. All I could do was stare with the same blank eyes my neighbors had. "Go turn on all the lights," I told my wife. Woman went into our house when we weren't home, plugged the upstairs bathtub, turned the water on. Twice in 4 years, would suggest to my parents it was me doing it. She would file noise complaints against other neighbors in my mother's name, then be perfectly friendly to her while other neighbors started to hate my mother. Classic female two-faced high school bitchiness. The shit almost led to my parents getting divorced. At my father's funeral, her friend told my mother about the bathtub incidents, and suddenly everything made sense. The neighbor's friend was visiting, and the neighbor stepped out one day. "I'll be back in a moment," after hearing our car reversing out the driveway. The friend happened to walk over to the window and saw her climbing over the fence, and then heard later about the bathtub being flooded and had pieced it together. I was 12. Our neighbor was pretty upset, and he came to my window that the Russians were attacking the US. It was the night of the millennial. I tried to calm him down outside and went with him in his car. He stayed in his basement until morning with a bunch of canned goods, and I slept on the couch upstairs. There was no evidence this was happening on the radio, and so I just went to sleep. He had heard it on Alex Jones, which was off the air. My parents had no idea I even left, and I went back home and to school the next morning. I never told anyone because I figured they would lock him up. I figured I had knowledge of a well-supplied cabin and a bug-out plan with a survivalist if the shit ever did hit the fan, and called that a win. I had no idea who Alex Jones was, but it had driven my neighbor to a near-nervous breakdown with his bullshit. My direct neighbor was always open-minded and very nice. After a few years, he became slightly aggressive and more paranoid. After we came home late one night, he hammered on our door and was about to beat the hell out of me, but didn't succeed just because something in his mind. He shortly died after that of a brain tumor, which has grown too fast to take out. It was so spooky to see that nice guy become a monster in a few months. His wife and daughter still live next to us and still feel the need to apologize for his behavior from time to time. In college, I lived in a party house for a while. We were having a party one night and I had dropped acid. Our neighbor from across the street came over and crashed our party and started telling me he had killed his wife. I was way too messed up to deal with that shit. The next day I came back from school and the police were at his house and the TV news was there. I went inside and my friends were watching the news, which was the same thing you could see by looking out the window. They lead the guy away in handcuffs. It was weird. He had just beat up his wife and she died. He lived across the street and used to tape a flashlight to his rake and rake leaves in the dark. I think he slowly lost his mind because he eventually started going out his back door and killing spiders, except according to his next-door neighbor, whose house he was facing, he was naked and just standing there naked where she could see him, which eventually led to a showdown with the cops with him standing on his front porch with a shotgun, while his wife and 2 kids managed to get out and come over to our house until they arrested him. Woman went into our house when we weren't home, plugged the upstairs bathtub, turned the water on. Twice in 4 years. Would suggest to my parents it was me doing it. She would file noise complaints against other neighbors in my mother's name, then be perfectly friendly to her while other neighbors started to hate my mother. Classic female two-faced high school bitchiness. The shit almost led to my parents getting divorced. At my father's funeral, her friend told my mother about the bathtub incidents, and suddenly everything made sense. The neighbor's friend was visiting, and the neighbor stepped out one day. "I'll be back in a moment," after hearing our car reversing out the driveway. The friend happened to walk over to the window and saw her climbing over the fence, and then heard later about the bathtub being flooded and had pieced it together. I should have never broken into my dead neighbor's garage. I was 17 when I broke into the neighbor's garage. I'd locked myself out of our house, and it was pouring rain. My parents wouldn't be home for hours. The neighbor, Louis Schaffer, had passed away 2 weeks before. It had been a tough blow. He'd been a good friend of our family and used to babysit me when I was a toddler when my parents were working nights. If it didn't seem like a tornado might come through at any minute, I would have just sucked it up and walked the few miles back to school. The weather was worsening, though, and as hail started to fall, I knew I had to get inside. Both the main garage door and the side door were locked tight. I ran around to the back. There was a window. The glass was blacked out. While I initially found that strange, my inquisitiveness dissipated as hail the size of ping-pong balls pelted my head. I took a rock from his garden, felt a pang of preemptive guilt, then smashed out the bottom 2 panes. Being careful not to destroy any more than I had to, I pulled the wood out from between the open panes, checked for any remaining glass, and squeezed myself through the hole. The garage was very, very dark. I'd never been in there before. Even with the dim light coming through the broken window, I had to feel along the wall to reach the light switch near the door. Thankfully, the power hadn't gone out. I flipped the switch and light flickered as the old fluorescent bulb overhead blinked to life. Wind howled and hail pummeled the roof. I dropped into a folding chair and tried to guess how much trouble I'd be in with my parents for breaking the window. Looking around, I was impressed by how tidy the garage was. Not even a grease stain tarnished the immaculate concrete floor. Everything was organized on shelves and in cabinets with a degree of meticulousness I hadn't expected of my former neighbor. He'd always struck me as a bit of a slob, based on my memory of the mess of newspapers and dishes in his kitchen and den. Apparently not. A shelving unit stood in the far corner near the window, holding some things I didn't immediately recognize. I got up and walked over. 4 metal blocks that looked like car batteries were lined up on the bottom shelf. There was some wiring coming from them, winding like ivy up and around the back of the shelf to a series of black cubes perched on the higher levels. Different wires sprouted from those, reaching to the top shelf, where they all plugged into an old television. The top of the TV bristled with more antennae than I cared to count. With the storm raging and my teenage boredom overtaking my concern for the broken window, I reached up and turned on the TV. The garage changed. Gone were the gleaming concrete floors and clean surfaces. In their place were remnants of carnage, dried blood, gore-caked chains, and chunks of what I could only assume was rotting flesh. A video camera stood nearby, capturing the scene. I retched as the thick odor of putrefaction assailed my nostrils. I whirled to face the television. My dead neighbor stood in the middle of the room, methodically mopping up blood. He'd been recording himself. In a panic, I changed the channel. Again, the garage around me shifted. This time, it was filled with 55-gallon drums, all leaking noxious sludge onto the floor. Yellow biohazard symbols were emblazoned on their sides, as if one needed another reason to stay away from them. I looked at the television. My neighbor was loading a body into one of the drums. I gasped. I punched the power button and the garage returned to normal. The old CRT shut down, its screen dimming as the energy bled off. What's happening? I wondered, trying to catch my breath. Outside, the hail continued to fall. I needed to get out of there. Still, my curiosity was overwhelming my desire to leave. I'd never seen anything like this before. What had Mr. Schaffer been up to? Against my better judgment, I turned the TV on again. The 55-gallon drums returned. I changed the channel. The room filled with the carcasses of dead animals, squirrels, raccoons, birds, and even a dog. On screen, Mr. Schaffer was rooting around inside the body of a raccoon, his arms slick with bright blood. A vague sense of recollection struck me. When I was little, I remembered going by Mr. Schaffer's garage and smelling something awful. I even told my dad about it, and he said a deer probably died nearby. At the time, I didn't give it any further thought. Now I wondered if I'd stumbled upon something without ever knowing. The hail was tapering off. It looked lighter outside. I could probably go. Just one more, I thought. One more, then I can go back to school, and tonight I'll tell Mom and Dad what I found. With that, I changed the channel. The scene shifted. A tiny boy, maybe 2 years old at the most, was chained to a small chair wearing only a shirt. He was sobbing. An intense sensation of primal horror began to build inside me. I forced myself to turn toward the TV. I didn't want to. Everything inside me screamed and pleaded to push the shelf over and destroy it all. But I couldn't. Not yet. My eyes met the screen. A glance was all I needed. I shrieked and pulled the shelf and all the electronics onto the floor. With a series of sparks and a burst of smoke, everything returned to normal. Everything, that is, except me. It was that one glance that changed me forever. That one glance showing the neighbor kneeling in front of the tiny chair and pulling off the boy's shirt. That one glance revealing the same birthmark I still have on my shoulder. I am someone who travels a lot. I can afford it because I work online. I've been to various places over the years. It happened recently when I was living in Thailand. I lived in an island with a small village. I moved into a good neighborhood. People were so kind to me. I was able to make friends with the locals easily since I knew a bit of the Thai language. There was one neighbor in particular that I became really good friends with. Let's call him Jack. Jack and I would do a lot of things together, like going swimming, fishing, etc. His house looked as though it had been abandoned. It was really run down. He never let me in his house before. And one night, when I was working in my home, I heard a woman screaming. It startled me. With that, I lost all my mood to work and went outside to check. The woman screamed again. My heart sank as I figured out that the voice was coming from my friend Jack's house. I went to his front door, which looked like it was over 100 years old. I knocked on it. There was no answer. The woman screamed again, and it came inside of the house. That motivated me to open the front door and get inside the house. When I entered the house, it suddenly became extremely cold. So cold that I started shivering. I was in the living room of the house when I heard the woman scream from a room nearby. I did not think any further and barged into the room, only to find out that nothing was there. It was an empty room, devoid of any life nor furniture. A chill ran down my spine. It was at that point that I knew this was a strange occurrence. "Hello? Anyone here?" I screamed, hoping that someone would answer. No one did. I checked all the remaining rooms of the house. No one was there. They had almost no furniture. It looked as though no one lived in the house. I felt an ominous presence at that point, as though something was watching me. So I immediately went out of the house and got back to mine. I was in no mood to continue my work, so I just lay down on my bed, thinking albeit what just happened in Jack's house. And before I knew it, I had drifted to sleep. I was feeling very tired after it all. When I woke up the next day, I had a scratch on my arm. It looked fresh, and it burned. It felt as though something had scratched me while I was asleep. I went about my day, trying to brush it off, and I finally finished my work. And by the time I did, it was already 4 p.m. in the evening. So I decided to go out and take a breather. I went to a local beach. There were a few people around when I went there. There was a salty smell in the air. This was one of the things I liked the most when I was in Thailand. As I walked down the beach, I saw Jack swimming. I went up to him and called put to him. "Jack, where were you last night?" I asked. "Oh, I was out of town," Jack answered as he reached the shore where I was on. I could not bring myself to tell him what happened in his house last night. I didn't want to believe what happened last night, so I tried my best to convince myself that it was just a dream. "So what do you want to do?" Jack smiled. "I don't know. I am just out here to get fresh air," I said as I started to walk. Jack followed me for a while, and we had conversations about different things. And not so long after, I decided to go back home. "I'll go home now. I'm hungry," I told Jack. "Okay, see you later. I'll just be swimming here for a bit," Jack told me as he hurried back towards the sea. So I went back home and sated my hunger with a meal. I had this strange feeling that Jack was acting strange, like it was not the usual Jack. What I found the most strange is that Jack did not invite me for a swim. He always used to invite me whenever he went swimming. I looked at the orange glow of sunset through my window, and something was caught in the corner of my eye. I saw a pitch-black figure standing right in front of my house. It had no discernible features, No face, no eyes, just nothing more than pitch black. It stayed there for a long time, maybe like 2 hours. And the occasional person who walked on the street would not notice this figure. It was as if I was the only one seeing it. I was frightened to the core. My whole body was trembling with fear. I felt too much fear to stay alone in the house I was staying, so I went outside and wandered around. I stopped in by a local cafe to eat something, and then wandered some more and took the path near the beach to go back home. The beach was in full sight, with dim lights illuminating the pavement next to the beach. I just realized that it was nearly midnight. I soon reached my home. I searched my pockets to find the key to unlock my house, and it was not there. I had to go back and retrace my steps till I reached the beach. I had no memory of dropping my key anywhere. Even so, I searched everywhere with my phone's flashlight till I reached the beach. I caught something shining, reflecting the light from my flashlight. It was half buried, and when I put the sand aside, I found out that it was indeed my key. Then, all of a sudden, I saw a silhouette standing in the distance. It looked the same as the one I'd seen before near my house. I attempted to ignore it. But before I could do anything, it charged at me with inhuman levels of speed, bumping into me. The minute it bumped into me, I was pushed by a force and fell down on the ground. That scared me to my core. I went back home and tried to sleep. I could not because I was too scared to do that. It was 5 a.m. in the morning when I started hearing something. It was a laugh. I could barely hear it. It continued for like a good 15 minutes before suddenly going quiet. I went to go and take a look outside the window, opening it, still hesitating to look. When I looked around, I saw him. I saw Jack standing right in front of his house, with a bloodied face, with 2 empty eye sockets, smiling ear to ear. When he saw me, he pointed his finger towards me and started laughing in an unnatural voice. He started talking from there. His voice was so loud I could hear it even from the distance where he was. Most of what he said was gibberish, but the only words I was able to make out were, "Get out of here." A chill ran through my spine. Is this really my friend Jack? The best friend I had been going swimming with? The friend I have done a lot of things with? After that, he let out a screech that made me cover my ears. I looked away for a bit, and the screeching stopped. When I looked around, he was nowhere to be found. I haven't seen him ever since. To clarify things, I asked the locals about how lived in Jack's house. They told me that no one has lived there for over 20 years, and that the family that used to live in that home moved away. I obviously did not stick there for too long and left that place. I am scared of that happening to me again. Who knows when I will meet another Jack? I ran over my neighbor's dog. I've done something horrible. I'm not writing this looking for any kind of sympathy or even advice. I know what you're all going to tell me already, and I deserve it. I'm going to go next door and admit what happened in the morning and go from there, so don't worry about that. I know nothing justifies what I did, but I just need to air this out somewhere and put my thoughts together before I go and talk to my neighbor about it. Otherwise, if I know how I'm going to explain. I need to give you guys some background information though. I live in the last house on top of a hill in a tiny little suburb with my brother. Next door to us, directly down on the corner where our driveway turns into an actual stretch of road, there's this little old lady I'm just going to call Mrs. B. She's like 90 years old, mostly blind, living on Social Security and some kind of pension left over from her dead husband, and I guess a monthly allowance from her daughter, who visits with her 2 rugrats about twice a year. She always blocks my driveway with her minivan when she's over. Sometimes I pick up her mail for her since our boxes are right next to one another, so she doesn't have to walk down the front steps. She really is a nice old lady as long as you're not trying to talk politics with her. Kind of racist, kind of stubborn, really likes to talk shit on Obama and those filthy liberals and stuff, you know, like every other Republican her age. She likes me though. Every now and then she has a quarter waiting for me on the railing in case I get the paper for her. Other than that, she keeps to her stuff and I keep to mine. The only thing that really ever bothers me is her dog. Her daughter bought it for her after Mrs. B's husband kicked it, to guard the house or some shit, and this thing has been a pain in my ass for the last 6 years. It barks every morning at like 5 a.m. and wakes me and my brother up. He's got a learning disability and has the mentality of a 7-year-old. So this means I get to calm a grown man down from a tantrum every day before the sun's up. I complained to her gently once or twice on my way to work while she was outside on the porch, and she just doesn't get it. She's got shit hearing too, so the thing never wakes her up. But her whole argument has always been, well, I'm in the house with the dog and can sleep through it. It can't be that bad. And there's just no explaining it to her. None. I've thought about calling the cops more than once to try and get them to do something about it. But if she needs money from her daughter to get by every month, I could never do that to her. I know what it's like to scrape by. I'm pretty sure the neighbors on her other side feel the same way. I think if it was just the noise, I could have lived with it. Dealing with my brother is rough, but I'm the one that volunteered to take care of him, so I sort of made that my job. But it's not just the noise. I have to chase that thing out of our yard a couple of times a week too. It likes to shit over here. There are patches of grass that are permanently dried up and yellow from it marking. It's dug up my vegetable patch, and once I walked out and the damn thing had a dead bird in its mouth that I guess it had killed while it was over by our feeder. If I hadn't run it off, it probably would have buried it in our crawl space. That's not the only time either. I've had to drag a dead raccoon out of there before too. Do you have any idea how disgusting it is to have to haul a decomposing body out of a tight, humid space with a rake? And you could literally see where the dog had been at it. It was full of maggots and falling apart, and seriously, I could gag at the memory if I hadn't thrown up about 6 times already today. Probably the worst thing about this dog is that it loves to chase cars. Anyone who drives up this street has to slow to a crawl to keep from hitting the damn thing, and it'll jump up and scratch up your car doors and everything, barking and slobbering and making a mess. And I swear to God, I'm surprised the thing lasted 6 years. My passenger side door is literally just a mess of scuffs and scratches from it pawing at it when I pull out. Mrs. B doesn't seem to think this is a problem. I know for a fact someone from the neighborhood was at her place a couple of months ago to tell her about it. I was just coming back from work, so I managed to catch like 2 seconds of the conversation. We always used to let the dogs run loose back when I was a kid. That was it. That was her excuse for letting that flea-bitten shit factory rack up thousands of dollars in scratched paint. I used to be a dog person, hand to God. But this stupid thing, Blackie, she calls it Blackie. I don't have any clue if that means it's a boy or a girl, but I do know it can be a racial slur, so go, Mrs. B, go. Yeah, though, living next to that for the past 6 years has completely broken me of that. No animals for me, not now, not ever. But yeah, so now you understand what it is I've been dealing with, so I don't know. Maybe that at least explains some of my mindset when I tell you how it went down. I hope. I know I could have handled it some other way, I do, and I swear to you, I'm seriously ready to shoot myself for not trying to, because now it's too late to take it back. The short version is, I got drunk. The long version is, I had the shittiest day of my life and then proceeded to try and drink some of it off. Mrs. B's daughter was over with her 2 kids, getting in that second yearly visit before the snow flies, so I was late getting to work because her van was in the way. Being late got me written up because my manager is a dickhead. Being written up put me in a shitty mood, which is pretty terrible at this time of year, because I work at a gas station and had to deal with an endless stream of hipster college kids loitering in the aisles and smelled so much pumpkin spice you'd think you'd just stuck your head inside a pie. Seriously, F pumpkin spice, and F every single person who takes philosophy classes in college, because I have never met one that wasn't a pretentious little twat. The amount of times I got snubbed by pseudo-intellectuals trading camera phones to take pictures of their $1.99 gas station cappuccino would make any of their teachers bawl. So yeah, I was in an awful mood when I finally got off shift. I went home to change clothes, and there was Blackie right in the middle of the road waiting for me. This was routine by now, so I did my thing slow to a crawl, let the stupid dog jump up and claw up the side of my car, pull into the driveway while it chased me and barked like it was offended by the existence of vehicles. My brother stays home by himself all day, playing video games in his room. They're cheaper than a nurse and keep him occupied. I leave him a breakfast and a lunch before I go to work and make him dinner after I get home. Well, today he decided he hadn't wanted lunch and had thrown sandwich all over the floor sometime after I'd left. I spent an hour scrubbing ketchup off the carpet before I could even get changed, and by then I was basically done. I couldn't think. I was coming apart at the hinges. I got him dinner made and settled back on his little Minecraft thing and decided, F it, I'm going drinking. So I went. And I got sloshed. I don't know who let me out of the bar. It usually takes a lot to get me drunk, and I don't show it so much until I try to do something, so I guess I talked my way out. The details are really fuzzy. I just remember I'd had upwards of 16 shots, and at least one rum and coke over the course of about 3 hours. I made it home without wrecking, somehow, and got to that little stretch of road right before the driveway, and just as I was getting there that man was. It ran right out from behind Mrs. B's house and froze in the road. And I just snapped. I was so angry about the day, and the alcohol just completely took away any ounce of sense I had, and I floored it. I just floored it. The stupid dog didn't even try to run, like it thought I was going to slow down and stop for it like I usually did. I heard its collar jingle on the pavement and everything, and then I pulled into my driveway, and that was when the reality of what I'd just done kind of set in. I didn't know what else to do, so I grabbed a couple of garbage bags and a bucket of water and ran back down the road. It was like midnight, so no one was going to see me, since there are no streetlights or anything up here. I dragged Blackie into the garbage bags, and I still remember how heavy the body was, how I could feel the hair getting sticky from blood, and there were little rocks sticking in it, and I actually threw up in the bags with it. Then I dumped the bucket on the approximate area I'd scooped it up from to wash the blood away, hefted the bags back up my driveway, and went out back to the vegetable patch to bury the thing. I was guilty already, yeah, but mostly drunk me was concerned with not getting caught. I figured maybe I could just make out like I saw nothing and Mrs. B would just think it had gotten loose and run off someplace, and that would be the end of it. It took me most of the night to bury the bags. The only consolation I could really think of was that I would probably have some nice tomatoes the next year. Here's the part where it gets bad. Like really, really bad. This is hard for me. I don't know how to say this and my hands are shaking and I kind of want to cry, because while I was getting showered early in the morning to get the dirt off me, I heard this noise. Blackie barking from next door. And it was while I was standing there in the shower with soap all over myself, just completely frozen. That was when I remembered. Mrs. B's grandkids stay over at her house for the weekend in the fall, and the little girl has a fur-lined autumn jacket. When I was about 12, we lived in an apartment on the first floor. One day, while I was home alone, the neighbor behind us knocked on the door and started screaming at me about his shoes. He accused me of chucking his shoes into the bushes or something like that. When I denied it, he said, "Oh yeah, Gnomes did it. I'm calling the cops." I remember being really freaked out because I was alone, and I had never had a stranger yell at me like that before. Then, another lady from about 2 houses down started to scream and chase me anytime I walked past her house. I had no clue what her problem was. It just started randomly one day. It scared the shit out of me, and I would run past her house whenever I had to go by it. It turns out my older sister, along with her boyfriend, had stolen the lady's son's bike, and the lady thought I had done it. I found this out because the lady talked to my sister, asking her to have me return her son's bike. Now, part of me thinks my sister might have thrown the neighbor's shoes off his porch, and I got blamed for that as well. My cousins lived in a small town in the middle of nowhere with about 500 residents in Alabama. The town had a city center where most of the roads and residents were located, and 3 other roads that led to the closest cities, which were many miles away. Like every small southern town, it had a local crazy person, and in this town, his name was Mr. Bradley. He lived on one of the 3 roads, and his house was the only one on that street for miles. The only lake in the city was across the street from his house, and my cousins and I got dropped off there to fish, with my uncle planning to pick us up after work. While we were fishing, Mr. Bradley came up to us and started a conversation. Eventually, he began talking about a witch that was after him, an ungodly species in the woods behind his house. He was known for saying outlandish things, so we just laughed and told him there was no witch. He insisted that she lived behind him and offered to take us to her house. Since we still had over an hour until my uncle got off work, we decided to go along. It was nothing but miles of woods behind his house, so we thought he was just bullshitting and that it would be a pointless hike. But he was entertaining, so we didn't mind. After walking for about 3.5 miles, to our surprise, there was a house back there. It was weird because it was extremely deep in the woods, far from any road or other people. It was a beautiful 2-story, almost Victorian-style house, but very dilapidated and overgrown. He took us inside, and you could tell it had been grand at one point, with old, beautiful, fancy furniture. I wondered why someone would build such a nice house in the dead center of a forest with no way to get to it. The inside didn't have any graffiti, but there were symbols carved into the walls, and Mr. Bradley said they were demonic. While walking back, I told Mr. Bradley I would help him fix up the old house and move out of the tiny old house he lived in, since the other one had potential to be really nice again, and my mom does remodeling. He agreed, and the last time I talked to him, he said he had just started working on it and was excited. A week later, he was missing, and the police found him in his backyard with his neck slit and a symbol branded onto his cheek. They never found the murderers, and it quickly became a well-known story around the town. Mr. Bradley's house and the area around it is now known by the residents as Bradley Place. Since then, more people have claimed to have weird experiences and have seen animals that don't exist while driving down the road. Nobody knows where the house in the woods is, but after my cousins moved away, I decided to go back and visit. All this stuff happened in the mid-90s, so it was my first time back in almost 25 years. Mr. Bradley's house was on the verge of collapse. I had a friend with me, so we decided to hike back into the woods to see if we could find the house. After an extremely long walk, we found it. It looked pretty much the same as last time, although there were a lot more symbols carved into the walls, as well as 2 rooms completely packed with boxes that weren't there before. I truly believe to this day that Mr. Bradley wasn't crazy, and whatever is in those woods is the reason he's not alive. When our daughter was young, about 4, a new neighbor moved in. This was in a desert community where the houses were on acreage, so there's lots of privacy, and you have to make an effort to get to know your neighbors. He was a single guy in his 40s to early 50s and pretty much kept to himself. Not a big deal, lots of us did. The first time we spoke with him, he volunteered to watch our daughter anytime we needed a sitter because he just loved little kids. Every time my parents leave for work and I'm home alone, my neighbor downstairs watches them leave with the light off, so you just see the shadow of a fat woman with an angled head staring at you. She does this because my parents are the only people who complain about her shitty little music. So every day at 8 a.m., she would watch creepily at my parents leaving the block, and then boom. You know I love it when you call me Señorita. Also, she once laid outside all night on the floor in a tank top and booty shorts in winter, and stayed there all night. She did this every night for 3 months. Every time I pass her, she gives me a look like she's about to assault me like a hippo in the most wannabe trendy F-boy type of grin. I hear that she breastfeed her eldest and middle child up until they were 6, which is unhealthy and messed up. She isn't just creepy, but also mental. When I was in third grade, there was this guy who would pay kids really well to walk his dogs. When it came out, parents reasonably told their children not to do it under any circumstances. Later found out he was an ass offender. Some kids still did in secrecy because something like $20 to a kid in like 23 was a lot for just taking a small dog around the block. To my knowledge, he never asked kids to go inside or did anything suspicious beyond paying kids an exorbitant amount of cash to walk his dogs. She wasn't a neighbor, but she used to live in our house and had an unhealthy obsession over our backyard. This lady has done a myriad of really messed up shit as well. 1. She divorced her husband for her brother-in-law, so her kids are her nieces and nephews as well. 2. She had a flower stand beside a busy road, and almost all her flowers were invariably dead or near death. 3. She regularly snuck into our backyard and pruned stuff just at the border of our property, so the police couldn't do anything to stop her. 4. She worked at the high school and was incredibly manipulative with the staff, digging up dirt on everyone to keep from getting fired, and enabling the disabled kids to do pretty much whatever they wanted, which included molesting this one girl that subsequently transferred out because she didn't want to be bullied for it. This lady had the nerve to say that this poor introverted artist student was catfishing the mentally unstable kid to touch her breasts. 5. Karen cut before the trend. I sincerely hope she gets blacklisted and spurned from town at some point. Old man across the street when I was about 8 years old. He was always babysitting our neighbor's little girl, but was horrible to us other kids who were older than the little girl. He was so possessive over her and got cross at us when we played with her, but acted normal if our parents were around. Years passed, and I was at college when my mom phoned and asked if the man across the street ever touched me. I said no and asked what was going on, and she said it was in the paper that he had been arrested as CCTV caught him, you know what, doing to the little girl at a park. We always thought our neighborhood was safe, and it was an eye-opener into why you shouldn't just assume you can trust your neighbors. This started over the summer and is still ongoing, so I'm seeking some outside approaches to dealing with these relationships. Last year, I purchased a property from the estate of a couple who had owned it for over 50 years. As they got older, they spent less and less time there, and by the time they passed away, they hadn't lived on site for almost a decade. The property is heavily wooded with lake access at the back of the lot, and was in serious need of TLC. Because of the woods and the distance between the lots, I didn't expect to see much of my neighbors. However, at first, people were stopping by all the time, telling me how great it was that I was cleaning up and renovating the property. This was awesome since I work from home, and it was nice to see the people living reasonably close to me. Everything was fine until the last steps, pouring a concrete pad for my van and finishing the fencing. I hadn't moved in yet, but once the extra driveway and pad were added, I parked my van there. When I returned for the final move-in, I found a massive gouge down the length of it, as if someone had squeezed another vehicle by or dragged something large past it. Anyway, I moved myself and my dog in, and because of the dog and the incident with the scratched van, I closed the gates. By doing so, I cut off access to the lake through my property. It appears the neighbors had been using my entryway and side yard to get down to the water for a while, as the old owners were never there to care. I started getting notes and knocks on the door about the problem I had suddenly caused. I don't mind the occasional neighborhood kid knocking on the door to cut through, but this was nonstop, like 3 to 4 groups a day, and they were not always terribly polite about it. I was even asked to move my van and vehicle so people could back boats down the drive. I'm now assuming that's how my van got gouged. I started by explaining I have a dog and the normal reasons for having a fence, but I was met with pretty intense criticism that I'm changing how things have always worked around here. The last straw for me was people opening the gate on their own, and then getting upset that my dog was loose in the yard. I finally acted by putting up a no trespassing sign, a sign indicating that the dog was in the yard, locks, and an intercom by my doorbell, so I can tell people I'm working and not have to come down to the door 5 times a day. Even though the summer season has come and gone, I'm still getting a steady barrage of notes and voicemail messages telling me that access to the lake is grandfathered in because the previous owners allowed it, and it's been going on forever. These letters and voicemails are coming from 2 houses, specifically a woman in her 50s and a couple about the same age who claim they represent the rest of the neighbors and the homeowners association. Although when I purchased my property, there wasn't a single mention of neighborhood covenants or an actual organized homeowners association. Sometimes the letters and voicemails take on a more formal approach, and other times they just inform me how bad of a person I am for ruining the neighborhood. My attorney assures me this claimed easement is absolutely not a thing, but these are people I'll presumably be living near for a long time, and I'd prefer to be on at least neutral terms. Is there a way to deal with this that I'm missing?
Thanks for listening. If you like our work, do subscribe because your support helps us keep this channel alive.